So we're going to pick up where we left off last time. I know this is a little unusual and sort of almost a college type setting, but we are trying to get through the Bible here and what it says with these. There will be a test at the end of class, so y'all be ready for taking notes on everything. But yeah, for sure. You can use your Bible as much as you want, though. Some of these are tough things on some of this, a little difficult to understand. But we were just looking at how different our society, our whole country, our economy would be if we followed what the Bible said, and we certainly. The Bible is pro-capitalist, and that's what we'll look at some more of that tonight in detail, what it says, but it has limits. Capitalism without any limits can lead to exploitation, can lead to abuses, can lead to crony capitalism, which is unfortunately too much of what we have right now. And so we just need some checks and balances, and God puts that in there to make things a little bit more fair for everyone and to give everyone a chance. So again, we're going through what would happen for following the year of Jubilee system, which was two things. It was the sabbatical year of every seventh year, year number 7. They would plant their crops for the first 6 years, and then year number 7, they were to let the land rest. So no labor, no planting of crops for an entire year. All debts were to be forgiven in year number 7. And then when you've had 7 groups of 7, so you get 49 years, then year number 50 is the year Jubilee, which has anyone who was a slave, which in the biblical times, the slave was a labor contract for most of that. It was a 6-year labor commitment. So if you still had some time left on your contract, you would go free early, and then all the land would reset back to the original family. So when they conquered the land in the time of Joshua, when they divided it up, that land was connected to the family name, and if they'd become poor, if they'd had to sell the land, if they had to sell themselves, they would be freed, and the land would go back to the original people who owned it. So we were looking at just how different that would be if we lived under such a system, and so we ended last time looking at debt. Our economy is based on long debt, 30-year mortgages and 15-year treasury, 10-year treasuries, 30-year treasuries for the government. So long debt is what we function, but in the Bible, 7 years was the limit of debt. And because we have so much debt, because our government's so much debt and every company has so much debt, just the littlest tweak to that, the sky is falling. Like, oh, interest rates went up 0.5%. It's the end of the world. Because think about it, how much $23 trillion in debt. If interest rates go up 0.5%, how much more interest is that? That's a lot, and that's a lot for the government to have to pay, and the same for companies. And so just these littlest, earnings decline just a little bit for these big companies. Well, it's the end of the world because debt magnifies everything. We've got so much debt that the littlest downturn is a huge explosion of destruction. So that's where we ended last time. So we're going to pick up tonight on under the biblical system, the Jubilee system. It would do a lot to preserve the middle class, actually. So it would prevent a handful of families of gobbling up all the land and gobbling up all the production value and squeezing out the middle. Because most people in Bible times, it was small family farms. Most people supported themselves on their local farm. And so by resetting the land and letting the people go back to their original farms, we're going to keep the middle class alive, and we're going to prevent a handful of rich families from just taking control of everything, and it's going to keep them alive and keep them preserved. And that's not how history has been through most of the time, and that's certainly we're seeing that accelerate in our time, that the middle class is disappearing. In fact, it's quite fascinating how at the very end of the Bible, in the book of Revelation, when everything is crashing and going all to pieces, there is no middle class. The middle class ceases to exist by the time we get to the book of Revelation. We see this in Revelation chapter 6, verse 5. It says, "When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, 'Come and see.' And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand." So this is the horsemen. You got the red horse and the white horse, the various ones. So here we're at the black horse. And what does the black horse say? Verse 6, or the horseman on the black horse. "I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius. A denarius, that's an entire day's wage there. So whatever that's worth in our economy, some people make $100 a day, some people make less, some people make more, but a whole day's labor for just a little bit of wheat. There are 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, but do not harm the oil and the wine. So we got a complete contrast. The oil and the wine, that's the luxury goods. The rich are doing just fine. Oh, don't damage that oil and that wine. That's fragile. Handle that with care. But meanwhile, the poor are getting clobbered with inflation, is what it is, that they printed so much money that you have to work an entire day just to have enough money to buy just a little bit of food. That's sort of like if you've ever seen the pictures of what's going on right now in Venezuela, or what used to happen in the German Republic in the 30s, when people would have wheelbarrows of cash and things. That's what it was, the inflation. And that's what we have at the end of the world. That's what it's going to be. The middle completely destroyed. The rich people are going to do fine, and the poor people are going to be struggling just to get by, and there will be no middle class to be any kind of balance there. And I don't know how it's all going to play out, but it seems to be, it makes it easier for the Antichrist to come into power without the middle class being there whatsoever. The few elites that are left, they can make him in charge because there's no middle class to oppose them whatsoever. So we've seen that happen, so that polarization, that division between the very wealthy, the 1%, as some people say, and the very poor. The most recent numbers I could find as of 2017, the 42 richest people on the planet. So that's going to be like Jeff Bezos, Amazon's, Warren Buffett, and Elon Musk, Bill Gates. Those guys. The top 42 people, they controlled as much wealth as the bottom 4 billion people on the planet. We're a little bit out of balance, And I'm not against people having successful businesses and doing well, but we see. With the Jubilee, there would be a little bit of a curving to that and giving the lower folks a chance, whereas instead the rich are just accumulating and growing more to where the middle are getting squeezed out. This is what's happening in every country, whether America, England, Germany, Japan, all the developed nations, the middle class is shrinking, we see. And another big factor in this is that the destruction of the middle class is how nations rise and fall. You have to have a middle class. You have to have a strong middle in order to be stable in your society. And so in times like the Roman Empire or the Greek Empire, all the different ones, they repeat the same thing. So the middle class is necessary to have a strong military force in order to protect your bases. So people who own land in the country, farmers or people who own the property, they're going to fight a little better to protect their homes and protect their land than people who don't own anything there. People, what we'd say, sellswords or mercenaries. That's exactly what happened in the fall of Rome. One of the factors was all the wealthy senators, they gobbled up all the land and they destroyed the middle class. And so Rome used to be a citizen army made of people who owned land, but then that got destroyed to where the Romans, they had to hire mercenaries, hire outsiders, barbarians to be in their army. And mercenaries, they just work for whoever's the highest bidder, whoever's got the most money, whoever promises them the most perks. And so Rome began to have major military defeats because they lost their citizen army, because they lost their middle class. And country after country just repeats that same thing throughout history, that once power and wealth and all the money control is concentrated in the hands of the few and the middle class gets destroyed, they come through collapse. And also part of that we see is the loss of the tax base. And I'm like anyone, I'm not a huge fan of taxes, period, but it's part of reality and it's part of life. But when the middle class is who pays the majority of the taxes. And that's just reality. There's a lot of people who have no clue how it actually works. And one of the most destructive political phrases is the phrase, about time the rich paid their fair share. I heard anybody say that. The rich need to pay their fair share, okay? Got news for you, honey. The rich don't pay taxes, not near the percentage that you and I and everybody else pays. They've got their lawyers and they've got their trust funds and they got their bank accounts in the Cayman Islands and they've got all their giant loopholes. where do those loopholes come from? Because the rich are the ones who write the tax code. So that's where the loopholes come from, and that's where they get all the things. So when politicians say, about time the rich pay their fair share, what they mean is they're going to raise the taxes on everybody. The rich are going to write their loopholes in the way they'll get out, and everyone else is going to suffer with higher taxes. That's what's going to happen with that. That's why anyone who proposes something like just a flat 10% tax, a flat tax on everybody, corporations, everything across the board, no loopholes, that scares the daylights out of them because they would pay so much more than what they do right now. Most of them, you look up a couple of years ago, General Electric, Apple, Microsoft, all the big companies paid absolutely $0 in federal taxes because they run it through Ireland and through Puerto Rico, and they got all these loopholes and things that they do. And it's sad, and yet they want U.S. copyright law protection. They want the U.S. military to protect their employees. They want all the perks, but they don't want to pay a dime for it. And it's working for them pretty good right now. But so that's what happens. When the middle class is destroyed, the government has no income, and so you lose your basic services. The roads get broken. They don't get repaired. The basic things the government's supposed to do to keep civilization going, that fails, and we get collapse with that. So that's why God was for this thing that's going to protect the middle class. We also see how the middle class is going to be protected from their land being stolen. That's what we looked at this multiple times with this, how Naboth refused to sell his land to King Ahab, and Ahab was trying to be fair at first. Hey, I'll give you another vineyard, or I'll give you a fair price for it, but Naboth refused to sell because he was trying to obey God's word that this is the family's land. It's supposed to stay in control of the family. And so protection from government seizure, protection from eminent domain, protection from seizure from the mob or anything. It's going to protect your land. This is what this is. This is strong property rights. That's what the Bible's for, strong property rights, and people being able to defend their land, or imagine this, being able to defend their country, being able to protect their country from invaders. What a crazy thought there. So you have to have these, small business. This is very much for small business. We'll look at that in just a second. Property ownership, people being able to own property. In communism, you can't own property. It's just the collective, the government owns everything, and the people just work for the common good, which ends up not working out at all. And so you got to have property ownership, you got to have rights to protect that property, and you got to have small businesses. That is the basis to have a society with a middle class. And God is very much for a strong middle class. He's not against people getting rich, and he's not against the poor and the poor having compassion on the poor. But middle class is what makes countries strong, and as the middle class disappears, then countries weaken. And so that's why the Bible talks about this. No permanent land sales. The land is not going to be sold permanently. It would only be leased until the next year of Jubilee. And I don't have it on the screen, but there's four times in the Bible it says, don't move the ancient landmark. So when they would set up the property boundaries between this is my family's land, that's your family's land, and there'd be a temptation to, let's move it a couple feet this year, and we'll move it a few feet next year or something. We're going to slowly encroach on their land. The Bible warns very strongly, don't move your neighbor's landmark. Don't even take just a little bit of their land. It's there. It's ordained by God how it's supposed to be. And so, very important. So that God is for people being able to own their property, defend their property. And that's what capitalism is, that you get to work and you get to keep a share of your labor. And the Bible is for capitalism. However, the Bible's not for crony capitalism. That's what we have in a lot so much of crony capitalism is the pursuit of profit above everything. Hey, who cares about these people? They might be working in terrible conditions, but whatever boosts our share price, whatever gets us the most profit, whatever gets us through, or we're going to hire these illegal people and pay them absolutely nothing because we can get away with that. That crony capitalism there. For correct, proper, healthy capitalism to function, you have to have a couple things. And you have to have morality with that. And as our country gets away from morality, then we're seeing the exploitation and the harm that comes with capitalism. And so you have to have CEOs who have a conscience, who are willing to pay people enough to live there. That's what Henry Ford, part of the reason America became what it was, men like Henry Ford Henry Ford decided he was going to pay his workers double what the normal salary for manufacturing automobiles was at the time. He thought it's not right for people who work making these cars not to be able to afford to buy one. So he said, I'm going to pay my people enough in order to buy the products they're making. He doubled their salaries, essentially. And he didn't do that because the government pointed a gun at him and said, you have to do this. He did that because he was a man with a conscience, and he wanted to be good. He wanted to be good toward his people. And so as we get away from that now, as people don't have a conscience, as they're taught there is no God, it doesn't matter, we're just animals, survival of the fittest, whoever gets to the top wins, then we're seeing the exploitation and the abuses. The average Fortune 500 company, the CEO makes 400 times what the regular employee working on the line makes today. Henry Ford didn't make that. And the men of the past who helped make America what it is, they didn't do that. They had a conscience, but we've tossed that out the window. However, collectivism, so what about socialism? What about communism, which are really just two sides of the same coin? Collectivism, it falls apart. And as Winston Churchill said, in communism, you just get to share the misery. That's the only thing that's shared is the misery in communism. You don't get to keep anything. You don't get any profit. You don't get to hang on to anything of your work. And so it falls apart. That when the government owns everything, hey, why should I bother changing the oil in the tractor? It's the government's tractor. So, the tractor burned up. It quit working. Now we can't grow any food. What's going to happen? And nobody cares. No one has a motivation to work on anything, and that's what they don't teach it in history anymore. But when the communists took over Russia, a big chunk of the people died from starvation because the farmers didn't have a reason to work. The government stole all their land. They put new people in who didn't know how to farm. Nobody cared to work because no one was going to get to keep anything anyways, and so they didn't grow any food for a couple of years, and just mass starvation. Same thing, communist China, huge, millions of people died in starvation because no one knows what to do. There's no profit, there's no incentive to work. Profit is not a dirty word. It is from some political people and the people in the mainstream media, profit is evil. No, profit is just a measure of efficiency. Profit is a measure of how a company is meeting the needs of its customers. Greed is what's criticized in the Bible. The Bible's against greed. The Bible is not against profit. The profit is okay. And so that's what we see, that why God puts these things to keep the middle class. And people who have some skin in the game are going to make better decisions for society. So people who own land in the country, when they vote, they're probably going to think a little bit more long-term for their kids and for their family down the road than people who have no skin in the game. People who are just freebooters, people who are just asking for which politician is going to give me the most free stuff. That's what a lot of people do when they go to the ballot box. Who's going to give me the most free stuff? Oh, free college, free this, free, yeah. That's all they do because they have no skin in the game. They have no thought for the future whatsoever, and that leads to societies collapsing. And that's what we're seeing, attitudes that are coming along with this. And that's what the goal of those in power that want to destroy our country, their goal is all these government programs and things for the poor and whatever. They don't care about helping the poor whatsoever. Their goal is to create a permanent underclass of people who cannot survive without big government handouts, and they will always vote for big government, and that will perpetuate their political power. That's what their goal is. All the way back when Lyndon Baines Johnson, all the way back in the 60s, when he wrote in the Great Society and all these welfare programs, that's what they said. We're going to buy the votes, and he used some very crude and racist terms about African Americans and other things, but said they're going to vote for us for 200 years. But that's exactly what he said when he signed many of the things in the law today. That's what their goal is, to create people who can't get by, who can't sustain themselves. They have to depend on the government, so they're always going to vote for big government. But God's system would be, let's help the middle class, let's help people stand on their own, be self-sufficient, have enough land to grow their own food, and be able to support themselves. Along with this, with the reset, the land reset every 50 years, there's going to be quite a bit of protection for small businesses there. And the Bible's not against big businesses. The Bible's not against people making money and being successful. But just like your society collapses if you don't have a middle class, your society also collapses if you don't have small businesses. Small businesses is what makes the economy go round. Small businesses is the driver of economic growth. And they do much more of the hiring, much more of the the innovation and figuring out new ways and new efficiencies. And so when you don't have small businesses, you come to collapse. And so by resetting the land every 50 years, that's going to keep your small farmers, who are your small businesses, that's going to keep them operating and keep them able to not go bankrupt. And so with that, that's going to prevent, what do we have today? We have these mega corporations that are bigger than people can even imagine. We've got a lot of industries are practical monopolies, or some of them are monopolies completely. Some of them might have like two players. You got like AT&T and Verizon and kind of T-Mobile, and that's it. It's a monopoly or oligarchy there, duopoly essentially. And that's it. There's no competition. And so people are paying through the nose for a lot of these things. And then you've got, in a lot of industries with the banks and stuff, you've got what's called too big to fail. This corporation gets so giant that if we even dared let it lose profitability a little bit, it's going to bring the entire government down at the same time. We can't let it, it's too big to fail. We can't let that happen whatsoever. Well, that's completely monstrous and completely outside the realm of what the Bible is saying, realistically, how big things should be able to get. And that's why God's saying every year, those who've done well, they need to take a haircut and let things reset to get your small businesses going back and get your small farmers going back for sure. And so what happened throughout most of history in Bible times and like in the Dark Ages was you had what's called feudalism, where a handful of people own all the land and everyone else works for them as their serfs, which is essentially slaves. And it didn't matter what your race or anything. It's just if you didn't own the land, you were toast. You had nothing. You were not participating in the economy. And so feudalism was great for a very small percentage of people at the top, and it stunk for everybody else. It was a rotten system, but that's why we're promoting small businesses. And God's saying, hey, let's reset things, keep small businesses strong, keep things growing very well. And so there are advantages to large businesses, absolutely. There's economies of scale. Large businesses can do things cheaper. They can buy things in bulk. They can get discounts. They can put more money towards research, development, figuring out new things. So there's benefits to large businesses, absolutely. But you got to have more small businesses than you do the large ones. However, totalitarian governments don't like small businesses. In fact, they despise small businesses because they want all the wealth to be concentrated in the hands of just a few at the top that they can control, and so they got to get rid of the small businesses. So, large businesses can make political contributions. They got the extra cash. They can buy lobbyists. They can buy influence in Washington. They can buy politicians. They can make contributions to campaigns when politicians are running for office. They can buy political influence. Your mom and pop store just doesn't have the cash to do that. They can't afford lobbyists in Washington. Are far more easily manipulated into political correctness. Every company on the S&P 500 has to, we give our money to the gay and lesbian fund, and we give to this homosexual nonprofit, and this group, and this thing. And they get manipulated in these things, whereas the small businesses, some of them actually say no. Some of them have a conscience. Some of them don't want to function. But if you're a big company holders, you've got tremendous pressure to have to go along with that. That's why Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby, those companies are not publicly traded companies. They can't be on there because if they were to be, they would have to be open on Sundays and they would have to give to immoral foundations and various causes that they don't support. And so, but large businesses, that's how they go. And large businesses, they can afford, they've got teams of lawyers in Washington, they've got lobbyists, and they've got these various things. And we teach our kids in government class and stuff, Congress writes the laws of our country, and then the president signs them. Congress does not write the laws. They haven't written the law in years. Who writes the laws? It's the lobbyists who work for the big companies. They write the laws, and then they hand it to their congressman and say, would you please sign this? And the congressman's like, how much money did you give to my campaign? Okay, we'll sign it. We'll pass. Ayes have it. Yes, the law. It's the banks who write the laws. The big tech writes the laws. Whatever the law functions in that society, it's the companies who have written the laws about that area. It's not the people. The Congress doesn't write any of those laws, and they haven't for a while. We see God warns about this, about those that just push out all the little farms and crush them. Book of Isaiah was getting on to people. It says, woe to those who join house to house. They add field to field till there is no place where they may dwell alone in the midst of the land. And so, saying, woe to those that the person who's done well, and instead of using that wisely, they've used it to crush all their neighbors and buy up all the farmland around them and push their friends and their neighbors into poverty. The Bible's saying, woe to that, and just push everyone out to, I own 10,000 acres or whatever. The Bible warns against that. Too much. You've not used your wealth in a way that is pleasing to God. Now, the thing about capitalism that functions properly in a free market that works, the most wonderful thing about the free market is that you have competition. So if one company gets lazy and gets behind in what it does and doesn't come out with the latest thing, then a new company comes along and they innovate and they figure out new inventions, and competition keeps companies on their toes. They have to come up with new inventions. They have to do things more efficiently, and competition lets consumers win, because companies have to work to lower prices. If you've got a monopoly, you can put the price at whatever you want, and people can't complain because you're the only supplier for it. But competition, if people can shop around, that helps the people and it helps the society as a whole. Well, big companies don't like competition. It's hard. Small businesses are quick. They're nimble. They don't have all the giant, tons of people to move around, and so small businesses can adapt quicker. They can innovate quicker. And so big companies, they don't like that. It's hard for a big company to change and to adapt and to come up with new inventions. And so big companies use the government to crush their competition is what they do. And so they use the government agencies to destroy small businesses. That's what pretty much every big company that has influence in Washington, that's what they do. That's what's called regulatory capture. So every government agency, whether that's the SEC, that's supposed to watch Wall Street, whether that's the FCC, that's supposed to, or letter SEC, Wall Street, FCC, Communications Commission, is supposed to watch our phone bills, our internet bills. The CDC is supposed to watch our health care. Every single one of those, if you look at the people who's in charge of that, it's people who used to be lawyers for the big companies, okay? So let's take the Federal Communications Commission. The chairman of that, his name is Ajit Pai. He used to be a lawyer for Verizon. Okay, now who do you think he's looking out for as the chairman of the FCC? Is he looking out to make internet and cell phone cheaper for the people of America, or is he looking out to help Verizon? He's working because when he resigns, he's going to get an even better job back at Verizon when he's done. It's called revolving door, that people just leave the big companies, work for the government to crush their competitors, and then they go back to the government or go back to their big companies that they used to work for and get an even better position there. That's exactly, the CDC is supposed to protect us from pandemics, supposed to protect us from outbreaks and things, but yet it's all the people from Merck and from Pfizer and from the big pharma. Maybe they're not looking out for us. Maybe they're looking out for the big companies. Maybe they want to make the most money for their former employer instead of helping the people of the United States. And so that's what they use the regulation, they use the force of the government to destroy their competitors. That's what we see all around us. And it was a lot of people's hope when Trump got elected. He had the show The Apprentice, and what he would do on The Apprentice. You're fired. You're fired. So we were just hoping when he got into office, he would just spend 4 years going around, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired. It would just do that nonstop for 4 years. That would be the best thing for the American economy, for most of these, regulatory boards and stuff to just disappear. You're fired, all you're fired, shut it down. But they've dug in their heels and they have fought him tooth and nail on every part of that. The EPA, boy, how many jobs do they kill for all the, I was hearing about this, they were trying to do a copper mine, I think, and a place that had never been developed whatsoever. And there was a family of rabbits and other critters there, and so they had to capture the rabbits alive, take them and keep them alive for several years, several generations while they mined the copper, and then when they were done with the mine, they had to restore it and bring the rabbit descendants back and put them back in the very spot. Does China make their people do that? Does Brazil make their people? No, of course they don't. And job-killing regulations is what we have, and why are we losing out to a big chunk of the world and all these things? Because small business is getting crushed by large business who has control of the government. That's what's happening there. And so it's frustrating. It's maddening, and people are frustrated. Well, why is nothing working in Washington? Why is nothing getting done for the people? Because they don't work for you. They work for the corporations. Okay, that's what Washington is working out just great for the people they work for. It's not me and you they're working for. They're working for their political campaign donors. That's who they're working for. And so it's sad. It's sad. And we see this with coronavirus has been a clear example of the government's war, absolute hatred of small business that we see. Big businesses has been just fine. We've seen all across the country, Walmart gets to stay open, Target gets to stay open, but yet small mom and pop stores right beside a Walmart or a Target who sell the exact same things, they have to be closed because of what their governor says or something. We hate small businesses. That's what the government has said through coronavirus, and that's what they're acting on. And who's been the biggest winner of coronavirus whatsoever? Amazon. Amazon has their stock is just through the roof because everyone's staying home. Everyone's got to buy online, and so they own parts of everything. And they didn't need any government help, and yet they've had a huge government help by making everyone shut down and making all their competition shut down temporarily or permanently. And as what we see the stimulus. Was the stimulus there to help you, or was it to help Wall Street rob the pockets of the American people while no one's looking and while everyone else is distracted with the virus and the pandemic going on? So the CARES Act that they passed, we've got no money. We're $23 trillion in debt. Yet the only thing Republicans and Democrats can agree on is to take us another $6 trillion into debt. Yeah, they come right together. They hate each other's guts, but they come together to take us even more debt. So they say publicly, well, it was only $2 trillion, but that's the unemployment benefits and the stimulus that comes directly to people. That wasn't talking about the PPP loans and the employer loans and all the airline bailouts. That was a completely other thing. And so when you add it all together, it's $6 trillion. So we're already 23 trillion in the hole, and we're just going to throw another 6 trillion on top of that, just like it's nothing. And those $6 trillion. Now there's other people have done this math, and I'm not, a calculus expert or anything, but we've got 330 million people in the United States. 6 trillion with a T divided by 330 million, that is 18 grand for every man, woman, and child in the U.S. That's how much it is. Yet, well, I got 1,200, and how much did you get? 1,200. My kids got 500 each. So what happened to the other 17 grand? Where did it go? Yeah, for real. Yeah, what happened to it? And that's if you're an adult. If you're a kid, kids only get $500. And so what happened to all of it? Well, it's poured into the stock market. That's what happened to it. Who's on the stock market? It's the big businesses that are big enough to be there on the stock exchange. And it's unbelievable because the stock market's at record highs. I think it's pulled back a little bit, but record highs. We got record unemployment, record shutdown, and yet how are stocks at record highs? Because the Federal Reserve is pouring trillions of dollars into the stock market. Because you got money, airlines are not making any money, cruise lines are not making any money. Half these companies are about to go bust, and yet their stock is going bananas because they're getting tons of government handouts. Although I saw this one guy on YouTube. He's a real estate investor that mostly buys houses, but he saw what was going to happen, and so what he did, super risky. I'm not saying we need to do this whatsoever, but he refinanced all of his houses with the lower interest rates, pulled out as much money as he could out of his houses, put it in the stock market, borrowed even more money to put it on the stock market, and the stock market went up like bananas, sold, and in just a few months he made over $600,000. That's where the other 18 grand go per person. It went to those people. And that's exactly what Warren Buffett, all the other stock experts, they're doing the exact same thing because they know how the government's going to work. Now, that was a huge, absolutely huge risk. I mean, if things had gone down just a little bit, he'd have been obliterated. But it paid off. It paid off for him because the government is there and see, we think we have capitalism, but really, what happened in 2008, the big banks, the too big to fail, got bailed out, got tons of government money. Main Street got foreclosed on. 15 million Americans got kicked out of their homes and got evicted there in the housing crisis of 2008. But how many bank CEOs and top-level employees went to jail? Zero, because the banks got tons of government money, and they went on a shopping spree and bought tons of people's houses as they were getting foreclosed. And so what we have, and it's exactly the same thing. Companies that should go broke, that have been completely irresponsible, should go under for coronavirus, are instead getting bailouts. And so in America, we have, as many have said, we have capitalism for the poor and for the middle. We have socialism for the rich. The rich can't lose money. If they get a shortfall whatsoever, the government steps in and helps them out, whereas the middle and the poor get left out to dry. And that's exactly what we see with coronavirus. That's not how it used to be. In the Great Depression in the 1930s, the whole country was hurting. The main thing in the Great Depression, people borrowed money to pour into the stock market, and so we're a lot too much debt into the stock market. But it was mostly the wealthier people that were doing that. So when the Depression happened, it hurt the poor and it hurt the middle, but mostly the wealthiest Americans who had taken irresponsible risk, they got wiped out. However, since then, the Great Recession in 2008 and other things, the poor and the middle get hurt, but the government steps in and says, no, rich, we're going to help you out. We're going to socialism for them. And I'm not supporting socialism, but that's why a lot of young people and folks are out there upset and frustrated because they're like, well, why do they get bailouts? Why don't I get a bailout? And they want to vote socialism. They don't understand the danger, but they're like, well, how's it fair that they get this and I don't? And so there's frustration, absolute frustration that comes with that. And again, with the Bible here in this, what this is going to do by having God's system, which is so much better than what we have, God's system stabilizes society. And so there's a very real danger, and it's happened throughout history, when you get the rich having so much, 42 people controlling as much as 4 billion people, when you get there's such a great divide between the rich and the poor and the middle disappears, that leads to conflict in society. And that's the point where we are in the United States. There are so many people who feel they are left out and feel they're being, the system is rigged against them, and they're frustrated at what they see, and so they want to burn the whole system down. They want communism, they want socialism, because they're like, well, it can't be any worse than what we got. And so that's exactly how you get to this tipping point where you have a revolution, and the masses who are being left with the little breadcrumbs from the rich, when they're left out so much, they get ticked off, and there's a revolution, and the rich get massacred, is what happens. That happened in the French Revolution, that happened in the communist revolutions, and I don't want that to happen here, but we're getting to the point where there's a lot of people who are upset, and they're willing to burn things down and tear things up because there's such a huge disparity with what we see. And so while on the surface it seems like, well, the Jubilee system in the Bible is just about hurting the rich and helping the poor, actually it helps the rich because it keeps them from getting their head chopped off in some kind of French Revolution is what it does. So it tells the rich, hey, if you will take a haircut every 50 years, just give up just a little bit, you got by with 10 million the year before, maybe you could get by with 9 million income this year. If you would take just a little bit of a haircut, maybe you would not get your head cut off in the guillotine when the revolution comes, because there's not going to be a revolution. And so it protects it. It protects the people. It protects the rich from the mob and from the resentment, because things are going to be more fair across the board. Now, you're never going to have economic equality. That's never going to happen. It's not possible, and that's what politicians and those that promote communism and various other philosophies, that's what they want. They want equality of outcomes. You can't have equality of outcomes. Instead, what our country was founded on was equality of opportunity. Everyone gets a chance. It's not always going to be the same. People are different. Okay, some people have more drive, more energy. Some people have more business smarts, or just whatever. They just know how to stretch a dollar more, and so they're going to make more. Everyone has the same starting point, but some people are going to get ahead, and some people aren't going to get ahead as much. But everyone gets a chance, and you cannot guarantee equality of outcome, but you can give people a chance. And so that's what in the Bible here, it was about giving people a chance. And God is not against people being successful and doing well. And in fact, there was a protection for the rich in the Jubilee system. So if you owned farmland, if you owned a field, and if you bought someone else's field, you had to give that back to them on year 50. But if you bought a place in the town, a house inside of a walled city, as the Bible says, you could keep that. That did not permanently reset. So you could build a real estate empire or something. You could build land there, but it's just not by clobbering your neighbor's farmland, which is what they use to have their survival and what they use to get by and to grow their own crops on. So you can get wealth, you just have to do it in the city. You have to do it not by exploiting those beside you. Leviticus 25, verse 29, if a man sells a house in a walled city, then he may redeem it within a whole year after it is sold. Within a full year, he may redeem it. So if you buy a house from someone inside of a fenced city, they can buy it back. I think they have to add 20% onto the purchase price, but they can buy it back within a year. But after that year, verse 30, if it's not redeemed within the space of a year, then the house in the walled city shall belong permanently to him who bought it. Throughout his generations, it shall not be released in Jubilee. So there's always going to be some families that do well. Some families that get ahead are just, part of it's things outside your control. Hey, this guy planted this kind of crop, and this guy planted another kind of crop. This crop did well, this crop did poorly. So, that's out of your control. But, some people are going to get more ahead than others. And so they could preserve that wealth. They could buy towns and buy homes inside the town and preserve their wealth through the Jubilee. So God is not about, some people misinterpret the Jubilee system of, let's just massacre the rich and spread the wealth to everybody, like some politicians want to do. But that's not at all what Jubilee was. It's about protecting the rich just as much as it is protecting the poor. It's just saying, hey, let's take a haircut on this side to help out this people, and we'll have things more stable all around, and we're not going to have a revolution or some kind of communist massacre for everyone. And so, again, God is not against people doing well. God uses rich people in the Bible. There are men like Abraham and like Job, Nicodemus, various ones who were quite wealthy. God used them for carrying out his purpose throughout humanity and throughout history. And so, again, there's nothing wrong with profit. Greed is the problem there. Profit is just efficiency. Greed, when money takes control of you, that's where we have a problem, and that's what the Bible is against. So there's no problem. The Jubilee system done right, it's going to protect people at both ends by preventing the worst forms of poverty and permanent enslavement, and preventing the worst forms of excessive wealth that lead to just destroying all the competition and destroying everyone around you. And so that is the balance there, and it's a beautiful thing, how God intends for it to be. Whereas instead, what a lot of people are wanting now, they want free handouts from the government. Well, that's not the answer. And even like we looked at last time, even in God's way of taking care of the poor, you still had to work. You still had to go out and harvest the food and turn it into grain that you could cook. You still had to go get it. Even if you were poor, you still had to work in order to get by. And so just God's way, it prevents that extreme separation, the rich being so completely different in how they live from the poor. It keeps things a little closer, and it keeps a middle class there in the base to prevent society from collapsing. So, if we lived in a system like this, it would be so completely different. You're not going to have any, Rockefeller family. You're not going to have any kind of Kennedy family, or people who become super wealthy and then they buy political influence for generations. Aristocracy, essentially, is what it is. You're not going to have that because people aren't going to be able to destroy all the competition there. They're going to have to. It will be redistributed and it'll be more fair. They won't lose everything. God's not about the rich completely need to be wiped out, but he's like, let's take just a little bit to protect them and to give everyone a chance. So it would stabilize things. And then lastly, we see with this, one of the most beautiful things about the year Jubilee is it gives every generation a fresh start. You get to start again. So the young people coming up aren't saddled with $23 trillion in debt from previous generations. Thank you, previous administrations and various ones of the past. This picture here, it's even out of date, 23. And we're just, this year, we're going to put another $3 trillion on top of that. But, what's another 3 after you've gotten to 23 trillion already? A trillion here, a trillion there. What does it matter? What does it matter to the politicians? So, but yeah, that's what people, they would get to return to their possession. You get to start again. You would get freed from slavery if you'd fallen into slavery. You'd get to start again with enough land to grow your own food and to have a chance. You'd have a chance. Wouldn't mean you would make it, but it would mean the mistakes of the past. So maybe your dad was a bad farmer, or maybe he took a risk on some kind of crop and it just didn't work and you lost everything. You wouldn't have to pay for his mistakes. You wouldn't have to pay for the mistakes of previous generations. And so just a blessing there. And in fact, in some ways, this would actually encourage what we call entrepreneurship, or people who take risks to start businesses. They would have a little bit of a safety net saying, hey, I can start this business, and if it goes belly up, it's not going to doom my kids and my grandkids to slavery forever, because it's not going to pass on the mistakes from one generation to the next. And so every generation got a chance to start over, and because it's based on 50 years, most people would get one in their lifetime. You might even get two. If you were a teen or early 20s in your first one, you might get another one by the end of your life. And so, whereas here, we have nothing like that in our society. So all the bills of the past just keep piling up and piling up and piling up. And and the government just keeps rolling over that debt. We don't even think about paying it off. Paying down the national debt is not in any politician's repertoire. None of them are talking about it whatsoever, and it's completely off the table. And that's bad news for the future. What we see coming along the way, and everything that I'm going to pay in taxes, and I work hard and I pay taxes like everybody, but everything that I'm going to pay over my entire lifetime in taxes was already spent before I was even born. I mean, that's where we are nowadays, of how bad the system is. And that can't go on. It just can't go on forever. And they're already talking about, Social Security is going to run out in 2035 right now if they don't do anything. And politicians are going to keep kicking that can down the road. We're not going to deal with the problems as long as we don't have to. Let the next electorate deal with that for sure. And so, well, what happens when that debt just keeps growing and keeps growing and keeps growing? And some people who claim to be smart economists like, well, we're borrowing from ourselves. It's not a big deal. We need the debt. That expands the money supply. That helps everyone. This is what the national debt does to people. This is what happens. So when the government prints money, you have this thing called inflation. So when, if there were $1,000, and if suddenly we throw a brand new $100 out of nowhere into that, everyone's $10 richer. No, everyone just lost 10% of the value of their money. What they could buy with that money just went up in price. Things things will go up in price compared to how much money there is out there. And so as the government borrows money and prints more money to expand that borrowing, all that does is just push the prices of things up, pushes up the price of the stock market, pushes up the price of real estate and other things around us. And so it makes it harder. And so, here's just a little chart. I remember reading a book about World War II, a guy's fighting in World War II, and it said in the 1940s, you could support a family of four. One man working could support a family of four on $1,700 a year. Could support a family of four and buy a new car on that in 1940, $1,700 a year. By the time you get to 1970, so we've got to pay. In the 60s, we've got to pay for Vietnam, we've got to pay for Apollo, we've got to pay for all the government welfare programs and the war on poverty and all the tons of things, buying votes that goes. We got to pay for all this stuff, and so the government prints tons of money. So by the time you get to 1970, the average income of Americans is $10,000 a year. Okay, so but an average house was only $17,000 a year. Average car was only $3,500, and a college degree, all 4 years. College was like $400 a year, and so 4 years together would be $1,600, when student debt was almost unheard of back then. Whereas today, the average American household, which is a lot more two-income family now than it used to be. Back in the day, it used to be just one income, but now it's a two-income family. Two incomes working together, the average American makes $60,000. And so a lot of people, hey, man, that's really nice. And then you get this tension between, and God's for generations getting along, and for the old mentoring the young and the young respecting the old. That's what God wants. But instead we get this tension between, those young millennials, those lazy millennials, and the older, boomer. And you get this tension between generations because there's no reset. that happens with this. So yeah, average young family, they might make $60,000 a year. A lot make a whole lot less. A bunch make a whole lot more than that, but that's the average there. So, these people who are from previous generation, man, you're making so much money more than I did when I was starting out, when I was 20, I only made this. You're making 3 times what I was making, or 6 times what I was making. Yes, that's true, but what's happened to the expenses in our lives? Well, the average house in America has now $320,000. So you could see the percentage, income went up 600%, but housing went up 1,800%. Okay, we're getting behind a little bit here. Okay, the average car went up 1,000%. Average college went up 25,000 or 2,500% with debt that has to go in, debt for cars and debt for college, things that didn't used to be there. So yes, people's income is up higher, but their expenses have grown way higher than what it used to be in the past. And this is unsustainable. This is absolutely unsustainable. It will collapse at some point. And I don't know what's going to happen in the future. Will America's economy collapse and something new take its place? Or will it be the end? Will it be the time of Revelation when there is no middle class? I don't know, but I just know this can't keep going as it is in the future, absolutely. And so, and the average young person starting out today, even if they go to college, they're $30,000 in the hole for student debt on top, and that's not even in this equation here. And so, there's a lot of young people. They're frustrated. Now, I'm speaking from the crowd out there. This is not my personal experience, and I have nothing to complain about whatsoever. We are blessed. The United States, if you live in the United States, we have more blessings, more technological conveniences, and all the things that people throughout history have not had. And we have no reason to complain whatsoever that, if you make over $30,000 a year, which is not a lot in America, but if you make that, you are in the top 1% of planet Earth. So nothing to complain for sure. But you do, statistically though, millennials and the new generation coming on, they're going to be the first generation in America to have it worse than their parents did and have it worse than their grandparents did. So we've hit the tipping point where we're used to each generation had it better than before. Well, now that's not going to be the case anymore. How often it can go till it burns, I don't know. I don't know what's ahead. But we see that. And so that you just this tension between, and there's a lot of young people out there that they're just frustrated, and they're like, well, forget this, let's go to socialism, let's go to communism. They don't understand, but they're mad at the current system for sure. And there are opportunities. People will work hard. You can get incredible jobs and things, but it is tricky, okay? A lot of the manufacturing jobs all got shut down. They all got sent to Mexico. They all got sent to China. They all got sent various places. I remember the story, Mr. Rogers, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, his show. He used to do all kinds of, he'd go to this factory. Here's where they're making crowns. Here's where they're making toys, every single, all kinds of things of the American economy. And after his show stopped, a couple decades later, someone went through and they tried to visit every single factory that was in the show. Every single factory from Mr. Rogers' show had been sent to China or sent to Mexico or shut down. We've gutted our manufacturing base. We've gutted our middle class. So what used to be the good middle class stable jobs are gone. They just get massacred and get sent because they don't have to care for the rabbits over in China. They don't have to, the government regulation and the problem that we see, absolutely. And so, and people get frustrated and they're mad. They don't know how to channel that frustration, but that's why I'm not defending those people who are burning down their towns and rioting, but they do have some beef, and this is part of the reason why they don't understand why is the system not working for us? Why is there such a difference? Why is it so much harder? Why can't so many people home ownership is completely out of reach for them, or to ever try to have what even their parents had or what their grandparents had? They can't think of it anymore because it is harder statistically. If you get a tech job at Google or something, you're okay, but it's not as easy as it was. And so I like Thomas Jefferson's quote with this: "No generation has the right to contract debts greater than can be paid off during the course of its own existence." Unfortunately, presidents after him did not follow that philosophy. Like, yeah, let's run it on the national credit card. Spend, 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 for sure. So the most recent Jubilee in world history is right after World War II in Germany, the country of Germany. They were in shambles. They'd been bombed to pieces, and the war had destroyed it. And so the Allies, back 20 years before, after World War I, when the Allies had defeated Germany, they put tons of debt. All the debt to pay for World War I was on Germany, and especially France wanted Germans to pay. You got to pay. You got to learn your lesson. And what happened, the Germans couldn't pay that debt. And so the Weimar Republic just printed money like crazy, and they borrowed money, a lot of it from the United States. The Germans borrowed money to try to pay debts to France and England. So all this thing ended up collapsing, brought the world into the Great Depression as we know it, and the government collapsing in Germany allowed Hitler to come into power and allowed World War II to happen. And so after World War II, the Allies were like, maybe we shouldn't be so dumb and do the same thing again. And so what they did instead, this time, they forgave the debts for the entire German economy, the whole nation. And if they're like private business debts, they left that in place, and private employee debts, they left those in place. But everything to the banks, and most of the banks were owned by the Nazis and owned by Hitler's people, so they're like, yeah, they're dead, they're gone. So let's just reset, wipe out the national debt, wipe out the banking debt of the German people, and so after the war, as things began to rebuild, German economy just takes off like crazy. And Germany was split in two. You got East Germany and West Germany just goes bananas, and their manufacturing just takes off. And even today, Germany is the economic powerhouse and the dominant player of the European Union because they got their debt forgiven. France had to keep their debt. England had to keep their debt. America had to keep its debt from the war, but Germans got their debt forgiven. So they went just through the stratosphere in their economic output, to where even after the fall of the Soviet Union, when East and West Germany reunite, East Germany was in poverty, but West Germany was doing so well, they could help revive East Germany, and now they're a unified country, and they're doing it fantastic. And they've got the most control of the European Union because they've got the biggest economy, because their debt was forgiven. That was back in 1948. And it's called the economic miracle, but actually there's nothing miraculous about it. It's just what happens when capitalism gets turned loose of debt, shackling it down. And that's what God's system of the year of Jubilee would say. Every generation gets a chance. Every generation gets freedom from debt. Every generation gets an economic miracle. Every generation gets a chance to see a growing, successful economy. We're not going to pass on all the problems from previous generations or all the reckless spending. We're not going to pass that on to the next generation. And so it is kind of sad. It's sad to see how much better things could be than they are right now if we just obeyed God's word and just what we did. But it would be huge. There's no way our current system could function like this. We would just have to basically start over from scratch. I mean, what would it do to people's home prices if you could only get a 7-year loan? Home prices would go crazy down, but more people could afford homes. So there's pluses and minuses, but there'd be huge adjustment for us to go to a system like this, absolutely. So that's the end of our economic study. Next week we'll look at the neglect of the year of Jubilee, because there is no record in the Bible that they actually did this. It's sad. It's really sad. And the fact that, the rich have to give up a little bit to help out the poor, can't do that. So that's not going to happen. So there is no record of it actually happening. In fact, that God punishes them multiple times for disobeying it. And so we'll look at that. And then we'll look at the week after the spiritual pictures of what Jesus is our Jubilee. He frees us from sin. He frees us from slavery. And the trumpet of his return. We'll look at all those things in 2 weeks. So any questions? I know it's been a little political, criticizing both sides, by the way, absolutely, but political, national things there, but it would be a lot better especially for the young people. For my kids, I would much rather them have something like this than what we got right now. But all right, well, let's stand and we'll close in prayer.